I organized the ceremony. That is the fact I have not been able to set down since the day itself, and it is the fact I keep returning to when I review the sequence of events in my own account. The Grand Conclave Anchorage, the invitation lists, the observation gallery with its three-tier seating, and the long curved viewport that looked out over Velsoth Prime's northern hemisphere, the refreshment arrangements, the formal seating protocol for 47 diplomatic missions, the order of precedence for the Combine's 9 senior admirals, the transcript service contracted to record the proceedings for the Directorate's permanent archive. I arranged all of it. I was proud of it. I remember thinking, when I reviewed the final program the evening before the Terran vessel was due to arrive, that the day would be remembered as the moment the Combine formalized what had been arithmetically obvious for 11 months. I am Velketh Orving. I have served the Velsoth Combine Diplomatic Directorate for 19 years. I have attended 14 compliance proceedings. I have never filed an account outside of formal record before this one. I am filing outside of formal record because the formal record does not contain what happened. The formal record contains what the Directorate chose to log. I was in the observation gallery. I watched the whole of it from the time the Terran vessel appeared on the anchorage's long-range contact system until the time the anchorage's main contact board stopped responding to formation queries. I am filing this because someone should hold an accurate account of the 11 minutes that followed the ceremony's opening address, and because the Directorate's version does not qualify. The setup first, because the setup matters. The Velsoth Combine's compliance formation had been holding position in the Velsoth Outer Corridor for 11 months, 6,200 hulls. The formation commander was Admiral Velthorin Su, 17 campaigns, 41 prior compliance proceedings, 0 prior non-compliances after first contact. The compliance formation's doctrine was arithmetic. When a civilization's full military capability falls below a certain threshold relative to the formation's present strength, the mathematics of resistance become untenable and compliance follows. The Combine's Archive Division had assessed the Terran capability at 412 warships, maximum, accounting for all known construction facilities and recorded deployments. 412 against 6,200. The doctrine said resistance was irrational at ratios exceeding 6 to 1. The compliance formation represented a ratio of 15 to 1, conservatively, against the Terran archive estimate. The Admiral had chosen to hold at 15 to 1 as a courtesy. She could have brought more. I had read the archive assessment. I had read the formation's pre-proceeding brief. I believed both of them because they were correct assessments against the data that existed. I want to be precise about this. Nobody in the Combine fabricated the intelligence. The archive numbers were accurate. The Terran capability as documented at the time documented was 412 warships. I am not writing this account to suggest the Directorate lied. I am writing it because the truth turned out to be more interesting than anything the Directorate could have fabricated, and because the Directorate's version of the truth leaves out everything that was interesting about it. The Terran delegation announced its arrival 9 days before the ceremony. 1 vessel. The communiqué was terse. The Terran Compact would send a single diplomatic representative hull, designation ICV unanswered demand, Commander Hale Voss, arriving at the Conclave Anchorage on the morning of the 22nd for the formal compliance proceeding. The communiqué included no demands, no counteroffers, no requests for adjournment. It acknowledged the date, the location, and the terms. It said the compact would be represented at the proceeding. The Admiral's staff read 1 ship and laughed. I read 1 ship and drafted the ceremony program. The 47 diplomatic missions read 1 ship and sent their senior observers, because everyone wanted to see how a civilization surrendered when it had the numbers to know precisely how impossible resistance was. Some of those missions had been considering their own compliance status when the Combine's formation entered the corridor. The Terran proceeding was understood to be instructive. If the compact, whose military record included 11 engagements over 40 years, none of them losses, surrendered on reasonable terms without incident, it would clarify for the watching missions what reasonable terms looked like and what the proceeding felt like from inside. This was not a secret understanding. Several mission attachés had said as much in the pre-ceremony reception the evening before. I had organized that too. The reception, 90 minutes in the anchorage's senior diplomatic suite, light refreshments, informal contact between missions. The room had been pleasant. The conversation had been what diplomatic conversation always is in the hours before a foregone conclusion. Professionally optimistic, careful not to acknowledge openly that anyone expected a particular outcome, but saturated with the understanding that everyone had read the same numbers. I remember the gallery filling on the morning of the 22nd. The space was formal, 3 tiers of inward-facing seats along the viewport's curve, with a central aisle reserved for the directorate's senior staff. The viewport itself ran 90 meters along its longest axis, floor-to-ceiling transparency, looking out over the station's approach corridor, and beyond it, the pale amber atmospheric layer of Velsoth Prime. The planet hung in the lower third of the transparency at that hour, its northern cloud patterns visible in the morning light of the system's primary. It was a deliberately beautiful venue choice. The Admiral had made it herself. She wanted the proceedings to take place somewhere that communicated the scale of what the Combine represented. A civilization capable of maintaining a naval formation of 6,200 hulls in one system for 11 months while simultaneously administering a compliance proceeding with 47 diplomatic observers, against a planet backdrop that made the point about territory and permanence. The gallery was comfortable, precisely lit, arranged so that the viewport was the visual center of the experience. The observers were in good spirits. That is the correct professional phrasing for what I mean. I will say it plainly. There was laughter. Not mocking, exactly, more the laughter of people who are waiting to watch a foregone conclusion performed according to form, the way an audience laughs before the first act when the setup is already clear. The Velketh Trade Block's senior attaché made a remark about whether the Terrans had sent their largest ship or their smallest. Someone, too, rose back, said the distinction probably didn't matter. There was more laughter. I smiled with the rest of them. I had organized a proceeding that I believed would take 40 minutes, opening address, presentation of terms, acknowledgement of receipt, formal notation of compliance, refreshments. I had estimated 40 minutes because that was how long it had taken the last 14 compliance proceedings. The Terran numbers were as unfavorable as any civilization I had seen through a proceeding. 412 warships against 6,200. The refreshments were arranged for 12 varieties, representing the full dietary range of the 47 missions. I had reviewed the catering arrangements twice. ICV unanswered demand appeared at long-range contact at 8:41 hours, inbound at standard approach velocity, on the heading the communique had specified. I watched it on the gallery's overhead contact display. The hull silhouette resolved at 4.2 light minutes, and it was, in fact, large. 990 meters at the primary hull axis, the contact analysis estimated, with a secondary drive structure that extended the overall length to roughly 1,040. It was moving on its own power at 0.02 standard. The hull profile was consistent with the Archive's classification. An Iron Covenant garrison dreadnought of an older commission pattern, heavy plating around the midship section, a forward hull arrangement that had the characteristic slope the Archive called the wedge-class configuration. The contact analysis noted the hull showed extensive repair layering on the ventral sections, the kind that accretes over decades of service, not months, mismatched plating panels of slightly different alloy tone that caught the primary star's light at different angles, a visible record of repairs performed at different times in different yards. The port secondary drive cluster ran non-standard, some modification without a catalog precedent. The hull had been through things. It looked like a ship that had been doing its work for a long time and expected to keep doing it. Nobody in the gallery paid much attention to the engine configuration. The hull was one ship. The formation outside was 6,200. The Admiral's acknowledgement contact went out at 8:44. Standard approach corridor confirmed. Anchorage docking formatted as diplomatic berth 7 Delta, which was the largest available and still easily accommodated a hull the demand size with room to spare. I watched the hull continue inbound on the contact display and completed my final review of the ceremony program. Opening address: Admiral Velthorin Sue. Duration estimated 8 minutes. Presentation of the compliance terms: myself and Senior Attaché Velmorn Seath from the Treaty Division. Duration estimated 12 minutes. Acknowledgement of terms by the Terran representative. Hail Voss, per the communiqué's identification of the commander as the compact's designated authority for the proceeding. Estimated 6 minutes, including any questions regarding the terms. Notation and closing: my office. Duration estimated 4 minutes. I had blocked 40 minutes. I thought it would run short. In my 19 years at the Directorate, no compliance proceeding had exceeded the scheduled time. The mathematics of the situation did not generally leave the complying party with extensive questions about terms. At 9:02, ICV unanswered demand cleared the outer approach corridor at a range of roughly 800 kilometers from the anchorage's hull. It had not reduced speed. The approach traffic system flagged the velocity at 0902.14 as requiring acknowledgement. Standard protocol: inbound traffic above 0.01 standard within 1,000 kilometers files a deceleration confirmation before proceeding to berth approach. The demand had been at 0.02 standard since first contact and had not filed one. The traffic coordinator transmitted the deceleration query on the standard channel. No response. A second query at 0903.04. No response. By this point, several people in the gallery had noticed the contact display and the speed figure on it, and the laughter had stopped, and a quiet had settled across the 3 tiers that I did not have a word for in the first few seconds. Not alarm, exactly. More the quiet of a room deciding whether something warranted alarm. The demand was not maneuvering. It was not accelerating. It was continuing at 0.02 standard on its inbound heading, which had not varied by a measurable fraction since first contact. That precision was its own kind of communication, though I did not understand it yet. The Admiral's staff transmitted a third query at 0903.41. This one was not a deceleration request. It was a formal acknowledgement demand. Please confirm operational status of vessel ICV unanswered demand. Please confirm approach protocol compliance. Please confirm Commander Hail Voss is in contact and functional. The phrasing of that last request, "Are you functional?" reflected an assumption that I think most of the gallery shared. A civilian ship failing to file deceleration confirmation was equipment failure. A military vessel of a civilization with no good military options arriving at 15-to-1 odds and failing to file deceleration confirmation might also be equipment failure, or commander's incapacity, or a crew problem. Nobody in the gallery was, at 0903.41, considering the possibility that the failure to file deceleration confirmation was deliberate, because a deliberate failure to file deceleration confirmation at 15-to-1 odds was not a thing that fit within a reasonable understanding of that situation. At 0903.55 the demand transmitted. Not to the Admiral's staff, not to the traffic coordinator. The transmission went out on the anchorage's broadband contact frequency, which meant it went to every receiver on the station simultaneously. I heard it on the gallery's overhead speakers, the same speakers I had arranged to carry the ceremony's opening address. Hail Voss's voice was not what I expected. I have attended 14 compliance proceedings, and I have heard surrender addresses. which are typically formal and carefully modulated to convey appropriate deference while preserving the surrendering party's dignity. And I have heard defiance addresses, which are rare, and which always carry the tension of someone saying something they know will not change the outcome but feel compelled to say. I have heard the careful diplomatic neutral of people who were trying not to commit to either posture while they negotiated something more favorable. Voss sounded like none of these. She sounded like someone reciting a prepared statement to a room she expected to be listening. She said, "Velsoth Combine, Diplomatic Directorate, Formation Command, Anchorage Staff. On behalf of the Terran Compact, I am authorized to deliver the following. The Compact does not acknowledge the compliance framework of the Velsoth Combine as applicable to Compact territory or Compact vessels. The Compact does not accept the terms presented in the 11-month preceding notification. The Compact has no intention of entering compliance discussions on the Combine's terms, or any related terms. The Compact is present at the Conclave Anchorage to deliver this notification in person, in accordance with the Compact's diplomatic protocol, which requires that refusals be delivered by the ranking Compact authority, face-to-face, to the ranking authority of the party whose terms are being refused. I am the ranking Compact authority for this notification. You are the ranking authority for the Combine. This is the face-to-face delivery. The Terran Compact respectfully declines." There was a silence in the gallery that I do not know how to measure precisely. It was not the silence of shock that came later. This was something more like incomprehension, the silence of a room whose mental model of the proceeding had just received a data point that did not fit any of the model's available categories. The proceeding was scheduled to receive an acknowledgement of terms and a notation of compliance. The proceeding had received a refusal. This was the kind of event that the model was designed to classify as impossible at 15-to-1 odds, which meant the model was, for a moment, simply not running. I remember watching the contact display and watching the demand continue at 0.02 standard on its current heading, which had not changed, which meant it was no longer oriented toward berth 7 Delta, but toward the outer edge of the anchorage's approach corridor, where the formation held position. I remember the Admiral's voice coming over the operations channel, not the gallery speakers, the operations channel which I had a monitoring feed for in my capacity as the proceedings organizing attaché, and the Admiral saying, with a clarity that I have thought about many times since, "Formation Command, close on the Terran vessel. I want intercept formation only, do not maneuver toward the anchorage. I want a containment envelope around that hull within 8 minutes. And then a pause, very brief. 1 ship. 2 words. 1 ship. The Admiral's arithmetic was the same arithmetic everyone in the gallery had been running for 11 months. The demand had refused. The formation had 6,200 hulls. The mathematics did not change because a single ship had declined to acknowledge them. I remember the laughter starting again in the gallery. Not the pre-ceremony laughter, something sharper, a little relieved. The laughter of a room that had been briefly uncertain and had found its footing again. The Velketh trade attaché said something that I did not hear entirely, but which ended with 1 ship. Several observers made similar remarks. There was a general sound from the 3 tiers that was not quite amusement, but was close to it. The sound of 47 diplomatic missions realizing that the ceremony had, in some sense, already been held in the only form that mattered, because the Compact had delivered its refusal, and the Combine's formation was inbound, and the mathematics had not shifted by a single hull. I did not laugh this time. I am not certain why. I had laughed with the others at 8:44 when the demand appeared on the display. I had smiled at the trade attaché's remark about whether the Terrans had sent their largest ship or smallest. But when the Admiral said 1 ship and the gallery responded, I found myself watching the contact display instead, watching the demand's single trace on the approach plot, and I found myself thinking about something that I did not know how to articulate then, and have been trying to articulate clearly since. Hail Voss had transmitted on broadband, not on a command channel, not on the diplomatic frequency my office had prepared for the ceremony, not on the formation coordination channel where the Admiral was operating. Broadband. Every receiver on the station, including the gallery's overhead speakers, which I had arranged to carry the proceedings. She knew about the gallery. She knew we were watching. She had framed the transmission as a face-to-face delivery, specifically identified that the Combine's ranking diplomatic authority was present as the receiving party for the refusal. She had addressed the gallery as much as she had addressed Formation Command. I did not have time to finish that line of thinking before the contact display changed. What happened at 0906:14 I have reviewed in the station logs 11 times since, and I still do not know how to write it so that the sequence carries the quality of experience it had in the moment. In the moment, I did not understand what I was seeing for some seconds. In retrospect, it is entirely clear. But retrospect is not the same as the experience of standing in the middle tier of a formal observation gallery, watching an overhead display populate with amber contact markers one after another, not understanding what they were. The outer debris belt, the Velsoth Prime outer belt, the cold mass accumulation zone running approximately 4.1 billion kilometers from the station at its nearest point, which the archive had surveyed twice in the previous 3 years, and confirmed as uninhabited debris, dispersed rock and frozen volatiles, low metallic signature density. Nothing of note. The outer debris belt registered thermal emergence on the formation's long-range contact sensors at 0906:14. Not one thermal signature, not a cluster of a dozen. 407 individual thermal signatures, distributed across the belt's inner face in a pattern that ran from the southern extreme northward along the belt's curve, appearing on the contact display in sequence, not simultaneously. The display's contact system rendered them in amber because the system had no prior classification for them. They were in a space the system had filed as empty on 2 separate surveys, and amber was the system's designation for unclassified contacts. The amber markers appeared one after another at intervals that suggested the activations were coordinated, not random, not debris. Ships, cycling up from cold soak, one after another along a pre-established sequence, like lights coming on in a corridor when someone walks toward a switch. 407 ships that had been cold-soaked in that belt for a period that the subsequent analysis would determine was no less than 9 months, sitting at temperatures low enough to read as debris on a passive survey, waiting. I watched the display populate. I was standing near the center of the middle-tier viewport, and I was watching the contact display because I had not looked away from it since the demands approached protocol failure, and when the first amber contact appeared on the belt boundary, I thought it was a sensor artifact. When the third appeared, I stopped thinking that. When the 20th appeared, the gallery had gone quiet again, and this time the quiet was different in kind from the previous silences, because this time I could see the faces around me, and the faces were not uncertain. They were the faces of people watching a number accumulate that they did not expect to accumulate, and not knowing when it would stop. It went to 407. At 0906:22, Admiral Velthorin Sue transmitted a contact query to the Formation Sensor Division. The Sensor Division's response came at 0906:29. I had the operations channel. I heard every word. The sensor chief said, with what I thought at the time was a commendably level voice, "Admiral, long range is registering 407 thermal emergence contacts from the Velsoth Prime outer belt. Profiles are consistent with Iron Covenant garrison-class warships, standard and heavy pattern. Range currently 4.1 billion kilometers. Approach velocity approximately 0.035 standard, increasing. Preliminary profile analysis suggests vessels have been in cold-soak configuration in the belt for an extended period. We have no file entries for these hull signatures on any current contact list." A brief pause. Then the sensor chief added, with the measured precision of someone who was very carefully not saying more than they were certain of, "They are not in the archive." The admiral said nothing for 4 seconds. I counted them while watching the amber markers on the display, which had stopped appearing one at a time, and were now all present and moving, the curve of them beginning to resolve into a geometric relationship to the compliance formation's current position. Then she said, "How long have they been there?" The sensor chief said, "Based on reactor thermal signatures at activation, minimum 9 months. The belt survey 3 years ago would have predated their arrival. The survey 8 months ago." A pause of 2 seconds, which was not the sensor chief being slow, but the sensor chief reviewing the survey protocol before saying what the survey protocol implied. The survey 8 months ago was passive range only, belt boundary at 32 light minutes. They would not have registered as distinct from debris at cold-soaked temperatures from that range. The admiral said, 407. Not a question, a repetition. The admiral was an officer with 17 campaigns and 41 successful compliance proceedings. She was repeating a number because she needed to hear it confirmed, not because she doubted her own sensors. The sensor chief said, 407 confirmed, Admiral. 2 more are resolving, 409. I watched the display. The amber markers had stopped accumulating and had started moving. The curve of them was resolving into a geometry that I recognized gradually, the way one recognizes a pattern in something that was not a pattern a moment ago. They were enclosing. The 409 hulls were establishing a containment envelope from the outer belt inward, sweeping in from the belt's inner face toward the formation's current position. The formation was already moving inward in its own containment maneuver toward the demand. 2 containment envelopes, closing from opposite directions, with the demand and the compliance formation between them. The formation's containment order had been issued at 9:03, and the formation had been moving inward since then. Moving inward was, for a fleet of 6,200 hulls, the direction that brought them inside the outer belt fleet's closing arc. They had been executing their containment order for 3 minutes before the outer belt fleet activated. 3 minutes of movement into a geometry they did not know existed. At 0907:03, Hale Voss transmitted again on broadband. She said, "Formation command. Unanswered demand has no quarrel with the anchorage or its personnel. The compact's quarrel is with the formation. The compact requests that formation command acknowledge the containment geometry now in progress and consider whether the formation's current heading serves its interests. The compact's fleet has held position in the outer belt for 9 months. The compact has not fired. The compact offers formation command 30 seconds to acknowledge the geometry and hold current position. The compact does not require a response on this frequency. The compact asks only that the formation stop moving inward." She waited. I counted the 30 seconds from the end of her transmission. I know the count was accurate because I was watching the clock display on the operations feed, and I was watching it very carefully. Formation command did not transmit on any frequency I had access to during those 30 seconds. The Admiral may have transmitted internally. I do not know what she said to her staff in those 30 seconds. I know what the formation did, which was continue moving inward. The formation geometry did not change. The heading did not change. The closing rate on the demand did not change. The formation executed the containment order it had been executing for 4 minutes, as though the transmission had not occurred. At 0907:35, ICV unanswered demand fired. Not at the formation in mass. The first rail discharge from the demand went out at 0907:35, precise, 1 solution, and impacted the lead intercept element of the formation's closing envelope at 0908:41, at a range of approximately 4,100 kilometers. The gallery's viewport captured the impact flash directly. The anchorage was well inside the geometry, and the impact range was close enough that the expansion was visible as something more than a point of light, a brief orange-white bloom that persisted for 2 seconds before contracting, the secondary detonation of a hull under full rail impact. The contact display registered the loss of 3 formation hulls almost simultaneously. The lead intercept element and 2 hulls flanking it, caught in the expansion radius. There was a sound in the gallery when the flash appeared on the viewport. Not screaming, not the sound of alarm. A sharp collective intake, the sound of 47 missions watching something that the arithmetic said was not supposed to happen, watching it happen anyway. The Velketh trade attaché 2 rows from me had risen from his seat. He was standing. Several others were standing. I did not stand. I stayed where I was and I watched the viewport and I watched the display. The demand continued at point 02 standard on its original trajectory through the closing formation, firing as it moved. Not erratically, not desperately, methodically, with the spacing of pre-computed firing solutions executing against a timeline. The formation began firing back at the demand at 0908-18, which was 43 seconds after the demand's first shot. By 0908-18, the demand had already fired 9 rail salvos. The formation's fire was not poorly aimed. The contact display showed multiple direct impact registrations on the demand's hull between 0908-18 and the time the contact trace for the demand became difficult to isolate in the general engagement. The demand absorbed those impacts. Its speed did not change. Its heading did not change. Its firing cadence did not change. It was doing what I understand a garrison-class warship is designed to do, which is sustain operational output at reduced efficiency against a numerically superior adversary count for as long as the hull remains functional. Not a maneuver, not a trick. Just the hull doing its work. At 0908-44, the Outer Belt fleet arrived at combat range. 409 hulls arriving at the range that matters for rail-class weapons from the formation's outer arc, which was the arc the formation had been moving deeper into for the past 5 minutes. The Outer Belt fleet fired in the same configuration the demand had used. Methodical, pre-computed solutions, sustained output against a pre-established solution library. The Outer Belt fleet's first salvo went out at 0908-44 and the formation's contact geometry began showing structural degradation at 0909-12, 28 seconds after the Outer Belt fleet's first contact. Not catastrophic degradation, the loss of cohesion in the lead elements, the first gaps in the geometric relationship between hulls, the beginning of the process by which a formation that is being engaged from 2 directions simultaneously and cannot maintain geometric coherence starts to become a collection of individual hulls. Individual hulls at 15-to-1 odds are a different problem from a coherent formation at 15-to-1 odds. The doctrine is written for formations. Formations have doctrine. Individual hulls at range, without coordination, are targets. I stood in the gallery and I watched the contact display. I watched the amber markers and the compliance formation markers and the demand marker. The demand's trace was still present at 0909-12, still firing, still moving at point 02 standard on its original heading. It was not possible to hold the demand and the Outer Belt fleet and the formation's dispersal pattern as separate elements on the display by this point. The contact density was too high and too dynamic. I watched the general engagement. I watched the formation's coherent geometry fragment, tile by tile, into the dispersal pattern the contact system renders when units are no longer maintaining formation spacing. I watched the amber markers sweep through the outer arc of the formation's former position, their own geometry maintained, their firing cadence unwavering. The gallery was silent for the entire 11 minutes of the engagement. I do not mean there were occasional quiet moments interrupted by sounds. I mean nobody spoke, not the trade attaché, not the other observers, not the Directorate's senior staff who were present on the central aisle. The room was quiet the way a room is quiet when everyone in it is trying to understand something, and none of them have the model to process it yet. 47 diplomatic missions in silence, watching. At 0917:52, the Anchorage's main contact system logged its last formation status entry. It said, "Formation contact traces confirmed, 412. 6,200 hulls, 412 remained." The engagement had lasted 11 minutes from the Outer Belt Fleet's first shot. I stood in the gallery for some time after the contact system logged that entry. The viewport was quiet. Velsoth Prime hung in the lower third of the transparency, its northern cloud patterns unchanged. The amber markers, 409 of them, were arranged in a loose holding formation at the range they had engaged from. Not moving, not signaling, holding. At 0918:04, the Outer Belt Fleet's lead hull transmitted on standard Anchorage contact frequency. Not broadband, standard. A different voice from Voss, a man's voice, clipped and precise, the voice of someone filing a status report rather than delivering a message. He said his name was Commander Breth Orvin, ICV unmarked return, Terran Compact Fleet Element 1. He said the engagement was concluded. The Compact Fleet had no quarrel with the Anchorage or its personnel or the diplomatic missions present. All civilian vessels and diplomatic hulls were free to depart on any heading. The Compact Fleet would hold at current range pending departure completion. When the Anchorage confirmed all civilian traffic clear, the Compact Fleet would take station at the Velsoth Corridor entry point and file standard garrison continuance. He said, "The Compact notes for the Anchorage's record that ICV unanswered demand filed its final status report at 0915:41. Commander Hale Voss is not among surviving crew. The demand's engagement log has been recovered by Compact Fleet Element 1 and will be transmitted to the Anchorage's archive on request. The Compact requests that the Anchorage relay this notification to the diplomatic missions present, and the following. The Compact's refusal of the compliance terms stands. The Compact considers the matter concluded. The Compact will accept no further compliance proceedings." He did not say anything else. At some point the gallery began to empty. The trade attaché passed me on his way to the exit. He did not speak. He did not look at the display. 2 rows behind him, the senior observer from one of the border missions that had been watching for instructive purposes walked out without looking up from the floor. Several others followed. I stayed because I had organized the ceremony, and the ceremony had concluded in a form I had not anticipated, and it seemed like I should remain until I understood what form it had concluded in. I have been working on that question since. Here is what I know. I know that the Compact sent one ship to compliance proceeding at which a 15-to-1 unfavorable ratio was the best available military option on paper. I know that the Compact's archive was accurate at the date of compilation. 412 warships maximum was the Directorate's assessment, and it was correct in that the Compact did not have more than 412 in standard deployable inventory on the date the assessment was filed. What the assessment did not know was that 9 months before the compliance proceeding, the Compact had moved 409 of those 412 warships into cold-soak positions in the Velsoth Prime outer debris belt. This is not a standard deployment. It does not appear in deployment schedules, because deployment schedules track active vessels, and cold-soaked vessels are not active. It requires a cold-soak duration sufficient to reduce the hull's thermal signature below the threshold of passive survey detection from standard belt survey ranges. The Directorate's survey 8 months ago ran passive only, at 32 light minutes. The ships had been there for 1 month at that point. They had been there for 9 months by the day of the ceremony. 9 months. The compliance formation had been in position for 11 months. The Compact had moved its fleet into position 2 months after the formation arrived, while compliance proceedings were underway, while diplomatic communiques were being exchanged, while I was reviewing catering arrangements and seating protocols and transcript service contracts. 9 months of cold soak in the outer debris belt of the primary system, at temperatures that read as rock. I know that Commander Hale Voss knew this. She arrived at the anchorage with 409 warships 4,100 kilometers behind her in the outer belt. She had filed a communique 9 days prior that was entirely accurate. The compact was sending one diplomatic representative hull to the proceedings. The demand was the representative. Voss was the commander. The compact was present at the proceeding. All of those statements were true. The communique did not mention the fleet in the belt, and it was not required to. The communique covered the diplomatic representation at the anchorage. The fleet was not diplomatic representation. I know that Voss transmitted on broadband because she intended the gallery to hear her. She knew we were watching. She knew the proceeding had 47 missions in the gallery, because the invitation list was not a secret, because compliance proceedings are witnessed by design, because the Combine's entire doctrine of arithmetic requires witnesses, so that the witnessing missions understand the mathematics. She framed the transmission as a face-to-face delivery. She was making the record. She wanted the 47 missions to receive the refusal directly, not through the directorate's summary. She gave the formation 30 seconds, and the formation did not hold. I have thought about those 30 seconds extensively. The Admiral had 17 campaigns. She had a formation of 6,200. She had counted one ship for 4 minutes before the belt contacts emerged. When 409 contacts appeared from the belt, she had 90 seconds, perhaps, before the geometry of the closing maneuver became irreversible. 90 seconds to compute the new arithmetic, assess the containment envelope the outer belt fleet was establishing, and decide whether to hold. The formation had been moving inward for 4 minutes. Moving inward was not a small maneuver correction at 6,200 hulls. Stopping an inbound formation of that scale, reversing its direction, requires time and coordination that 90 seconds does not provide. I do not know if the Admiral had time to understand the geometry before it was too late to change it. I know that she did not transmit a hold order on any channel I had access to. I know that Voss offered the 30 seconds while the formation was still moving inward. Whether the 30 seconds was a genuine offer or whether Voss had computed the formation's inertia and already knew that 30 seconds was insufficient to stop 6,200 hulls in mid-close maneuver, I cannot say. I was in the gallery. I am a diplomat, not a formation commander. I do not know what can be stopped in 30 seconds. The formal record says the engagement resulted in a formation strength reduction from 6,200 to 412 hulls. 412 is the number the archive had projected as the compact's total maximum military capability. This is not a coincidence I know how to categorize. 412 hulls remained from a formation of 6,200. The compact's fleet had engaged with 409. One engaged on its own against the intercept formation. 410 against 6,200. Those were the real numbers, not 412 against 6,200. 410. The compact had kept 2 hulls in reserve or in transit or in some status that was not cold soak in the belt. I do not know why. I have thought about it and I do not know. The engagement log from the demand was transmitted to the directorate and I received a copy. The log ends at 0915-38. The last entry is a weapon solution file. The final 3 firing solutions Commander Voss released before the log ends. I looked up the target contact numbers against the formation's roster. The 3 contacts were the lead elements of the intercept formation that had been closing on the demand from 9:03 onward. All 3 of those contacts are among the 412 that remained after the engagement concluded. The demand's final 3 solutions were filed and not executed. I have thought about this for a long time. I have no certain interpretation. A filed solution is not a fired solution. Why file 3 solutions against 3 hulls and not execute them in the final seconds of a hull that was sustaining multiple rail impacts and was not going to be operational much longer? I do not know. They are filed in the log. They are not marked as executed. The 3 target hulls are alive. The Velsoth corridor entry still shows the garrison continuance broadcast on the standard cycle. 409 hulls at station, holding position. They have been holding since the day after the engagement. The broadcast runs on the 8-minute cycle that Iron Covenant garrison doctrine specifies. It has not varied. The hulls have not moved. The Combine has not transmitted a second compliance notification. I do not know if it will. That is not my decision and has not been since I filed this account outside the formal record, which means it was placed in a category of documents that removes the filing attaché from active proceeding duties for the relevant civilization until the account's contents are reviewed. That review will take time. The Directorate moves carefully. I organized the ceremony. I arranged the seating, the transcript service, the refreshments, 12 varieties representing the full dietary range of the 47 missions. The catering staff was in the service corridor behind the gallery for the 11 minutes of the engagement. When the gallery cleared, they packed the arrangements and departed. The refreshments were never served. I keep thinking about the refreshments because they are the clearest evidence of what I understood the day to be when I organized it. An attaché who expects a military engagement does not arrange 12 varieties of refreshments. An attaché who expects a surrender does. I arranged them. I organized the ceremony. I laughed with the others when the demand appeared on the display alone. Hale Voss transmitted on broadband because she knew we were counting. She sent 1 ship because she knew how we would count it. The fleet in the belt was not the show. The fleet in the belt was the answer to the arithmetic. The show was the single hull arriving on schedule, filing a refusal, and then waiting to see whether 6,200 hulls would acknowledge a geometry that made their arithmetic irrelevant. They did not acknowledge it. They continued inward. The 30 seconds closed. The demand fired. I want those things in the record. I want the broadband transmission and the 30 seconds and the 3 unfired solutions in the record. I want the fact that someone organized a ceremony designed to formalize a civilization's surrender, and that civilization sent 1 ship, and the ship was not there to surrender, and the 1 ship was not alone. The Velsoth corridor entry light is showing the garrison broadcast. 409 hulls. They have not moved. I want to be precise about one other thing, because the formal record will not mention it, and I was present for it, and it matters. In the 19 years I have worked for the Directorate, I have organized or attended 14 compliance proceedings. Not all of them proceeded identically. There was one 12 years ago, where the complying civilization attempted a last cycle negotiation, sent additional terms, requested an extended review period, filed a legal challenge to the Combine's corridor designation authority. The challenge was reviewed and dismissed in 3 days. The negotiation attempt was acknowledged and declined. The compliance proceeding was rescheduled 14 days later and completed without further complication. There was another, 8 years ago, where the complying civilization sent a senior military officer as its representative, not a diplomat, which was understood to be a statement of the civilization's desire to have the proceeding treated as a military formality rather than a political capitulation, a distinction that mattered to their internal governance structure. The Combine accommodated the preference. The proceeding ran identically to all others. These variations in form do not change the mathematics. The Directorate understood this. I understood this. What I did not understand, in 19 years of proceedings, was the possibility that a civilization facing 15-to-1 odds would spend 9 months embedding its entire active military fleet in the primary system's outer debris belt at cold-soaked temperatures, File no indication of this activity in any communique or diplomatic exchange. Allow compliance proceedings to continue on schedule, and then send a single hull to deliver the refusal face-to-face, on broadband, in front of 47 missions. I did not understand this because, in 19 years, the Directorate's doctrine of arithmetic had never encountered a civilization that counted differently than the doctrine expected. The doctrine counted hulls, counted them against each other and derived a ratio, and assessed the ratio against a threshold, and generated an outcome probability. 412 against 6,200 generated an outcome probability indistinguishable from certainty. The Directorate's doctrine was not wrong about the arithmetic. It was wrong about what was being counted. The compact was not counting the ratio of active deployed hulls at the moment of proceedings. The compact was counting something else. It was counting the ratio of active deployed hulls at the moment of engagement, at a time and location of the compact's choosing, which is a different calculation from the one the doctrine runs. This is the thing I keep failing to write clearly enough, so I will try again. The Directorate's archive assessed 412 warships. This was accurate. The compact had 412 warships on the day the assessment was filed. The compact moved 409 of those warships into cold soak in the outer belt 2 months later and maintained them there for 9 months while compliance proceedings continued. The archive did not update its assessment because the archive had no observation of the movement. The hulls were cold. The belt survey that followed was passive range. The communiques from the compact's diplomatic channel showed no unusual activity. The archive figure of 412 was never revised. The formation held at 6,200 against 412 for the entire 11 months. The compact held at 409 in the outer belt against 6,200 for the entire 9 months. The Directorate was counting a ratio of 15:1. The compact was counting a geometry of bilateral enclosure. These are not the same calculation. The thing that I cannot resolve, even now, is the timing. The compact moved its fleet into the belt 2 months after the formation arrived. 2 months. The compact had been watching the formation for 2 months and then made the decision to move 409 hulls into cold soak concealment in the primary system's outer belt and wait for 9 months while the proceedings continued. That decision required a calculation. The compact had to assess the likelihood that the passive survey schedule would not detect the fleet. The compact had to assess the cold soak duration required to reduce thermal signatures to debris level at the survey range. The compact had to assess the formation's inertia, the time required to stop an inbound formation of 6,200 hulls, the closing speed at standard maneuver, the seconds available for a formation commander to recognize a containment geometry and halt before the geometry became irreversible. The compact computed all of this 9 months before the ceremony. It computed it against the Combine's own procedural patterns, the survey schedule, the formation doctrine, the compliance proceeding timeline. It computed everything the Directorate did not know it was computing. Hale Voss arrived knowing all of this. She arrived knowing the belt fleet was there, knowing the survey schedule had not detected it, knowing the 30 seconds she would offer was 30 seconds the formation could not act on in time. She arrived on broadband because she wanted the 47 missions to receive the refusal directly, not through the Directorate's summary, because the 47 missions were the actual audience. The compliance formation was not going to be persuaded by a refusal. The 47 missions were the ones that were watching to understand what compliance meant, and what refusal meant, and what the arithmetic of compliance doctrine looked like when a civilization had been counting the geometry instead. I think about the missions that had been considering their own compliance status. I think about what they understood when the belt contacts resolved, and the engagement ran for 11 minutes, and the formation 6,200 became 412. The proceeding was instructive. just not in the form I had organized it to be. The formal record will say that the compliance formation suffered catastrophic losses in an engagement with a Terran compact military force. This is accurate. The formal record will not say anything about the 30 seconds. It will not say anything about the broadband transmission addressed to the gallery. It will not say anything about 9 months of cold soak, or the 2-month window between the formation's arrival and the compact's decision to move its fleet, or the 3 unfired final solutions, or the fact that the demand was at .02 standard on a heading that was not toward the berth the anchorage had prepared for it. The formal record will not say anything about the refreshments. I want all of it written. I want the whole account in a document that exists somewhere outside the formal record, because the formal record is a record of what happened, and this account is a record of what it meant to be in the gallery when it happened, and I believe those are different things. The formal record will inform policy. This account will not inform policy. This account is for the attaché who organized the ceremony and stood in the middle tier of the gallery and watched the contact display for 11 minutes and is still trying, some considerable time later, to understand what exactly the compact was counting when it decided to send one ship. I think it was counting us, not the formation. The formation was not the audience for the 30 seconds or the broadband transmission, or the single hull arriving on schedule with perfect precision on a heading that took it directly through 6,200 ships rather than toward the berth. The formation was the circumstance. We were the audience. The 47 missions, the admiral, the directorate, the transcript service I had contracted to record the proceedings. The compact sent one ship in front of all of us because it knew we were watching, and it knew we were counting, and it wanted the count to be visible. The count was, one ship refused in person face-to-face, on the scheduled date, in front of 47 missions, and waited 30 seconds for the formation to acknowledge a geometry it could not resolve, and then demonstrated what 409 cold-soaked warships in a bilateral enclosure produce against 6,200 hulls in mid-close maneuver, and the answer was 412. That was the count the compact wanted on the record. The garrison broadcast is still running on the standard cycle. I organized the ceremony.